Hello, I am the Forgotten Man, and recently I attended a protest against male genital mutilation. It was the largest protest against male genital mutilation that there's been in the UK. During the protest I was able to interview many of the people involved, some of whom had been circumcised, others hadn't, but they stood in solidarity with their brothers whose lives had been irrevocably changed by this horrible process. All of the interviews were powerful, enlightening, and really demonstrated the true horror of male genital mutilation. In this video, I have compiled all of the interviews that happened that day in their full length. I hope you enjoy.
We're coming today to protest outside the largest private male circumcision clinic in the country, Thornhill Clinic in Luton. Today is officially the largest ever anti-MGM protest ever mounted in this country. Just a few of the people here, but we have people with placards like this on the main road, and we're having people stop and chatting, passers by in cars, putting a thumbs up, and altogether it's been very peaceful and positive, and we hope it'll stay that way.
And you're sort of with the practice of circumcision, and male genital mutilation more generally, you sort of think that this is a bad practice?
Yes, I mean it's appalling. It's illegal. It creates a great deal of physical and psychological suffering, and the fact it still exists in 2016 is just truly appalling. It needs to be consigned to the dustbin of history, quite frankly, and anything we can do to put it there, we'll do.
I'm Rick Bradford. I'm here today as part of a group of men and women complaining and demonstrating against male genital mutilation outside the Thornhill Clinic in Luton, one of the biggest circumcision clinics in the country. Why am I against male genital mutilation? Well, it's self-evident, isn't it? Why does anyone have to explain why they would be against male genital mutilation? Surely the boot is on the other foot, isn't it? Surely people who approve of cutting bits off babies, and that's what it is, chopping bits off babies without any medical reason, surely people who approve of that should be put on the spot to defend their opinions. To me, it's self-evident that it's completely intolerable. It's barbaric in this day and age, and it needs to stop. It baffles me that our society still condones this barbaric practice, which actually is illegal. Of course it's illegal because it's assault, and yet it's tolerated. It's not legal, it's tolerated, which is different. So that's why I'm here.
So why do you think it's tolerated?
Well, it's become normalised. It's simply because it's been going on for a long time, and there's never been sufficient voices raised in protest. I think a lot of people actually, probably quietly, aren't really comfortable with it, but they're reticent about saying so, and part of the reason probably is the religious issue. But the religious issue is not the issue. It is not primarily in this country or in any Anglophone country actually primarily a religious issue. In all Anglophone countries, the majority of men that have been circumcised have not been circumcised for religious reasons. They're not Jewish or Muslim. They're nominally Christian or atheist. people who have been circumcised really for cultural reasons, not for religious ones. I mean, in this country, for example, it's something like 15% of men have been circumcised, but only about 5% of men are Muslim or Jewish. And of course, the extreme example of this is in the United States, where 56% of men, more than half of men, have been circumcised, but only about 3% of their population is Jewish or Muslim. So it's not a religious issue, but I think the religious issue does make it hard to campaign against it because it confuses the matter. But it's fundamentally a human rights issue and a rights of the child issue. It's an assault on children. Children cannot give meaningful consent. I mean, I have no objection to an adult man deciding he wants to elect to be circumcised. That's fine. If you've reached an age of consent, then of course you can consent to be circumcised if you're an adult. But it's entirely wrong to do it to children because they can't consent. And it's wrong to suppose that parents have the right to decide such a thing on behalf of a child, because parents don't have the right to mutilate their children. Parents have the obligation to protect their children, which is a different thing entirely.
I'm here to show my anger, disgust, dismay, bemusement that an article like this can be published in the Broad Street, the heavyweight press. This is in the Times in June 2012. That's saying that it's okay to circumcise baby boys, and admitting that this is child abuse, and still saying that this is an abuse that we as a society can or we must tolerate for the purpose of maintaining religious harmony, or so we're not offending religious sensibilities. And everyone thinks that's okay. This can be published, and there's no knee-jerk response from the public saying, "Wait a minute, you're admitting that child abuse is okay," and this article can be published, and a woman actually there's the rub. You know, this is a child abuse that isn't against all children. This is a child abuse against male children. It's against boys, but that's okay because we know that girls are protected. They're legally protected. There's an argument that they're not all being actually protected. We don't know for certain what's going on. That never gets exposed to the legal process. But there is a law there, an explicit law, which actually protects girls from any interference with their bodies.
You feel it causes a lot of harm for young boys' lives and circumcision?
That's an ongoing debate that will rage on and on. There's many men who feel this was imposed on them as children, and they've never felt the slightest bit harmed by it. But that's irrelevant, really, because there are plenty of men who feel this was an abuse of their rights, a violation of their body, and I'm one of them. And the nub of it all is, though, that regardless of what people say, the proclaimed health benefits and so on and so forth, this is sex discrimination. This happens to boys, and it's seemingly accepted by our society, and that's all wrong, really, because no way would this be tolerated at all if anyone proposed putting the slightest nick on or a little scratch on a girl's genitalia. This would be a criminal action. But it's okay to cut normal, healthy, functional tissue from a boy's body, and he just has to accept that and get on with his life. And this is absolute, total sex discrimination against men. And this has gone on for far too long, and we are going to, all the guys here today, there's at least 15 of us here today, and we are determined that this now, we are going to bring this to an end. And I'm really pleased because we've been campaigning for this now on the streets. Myself and some other guys here, we've been campaigning since 2011. We're getting into 5 years now we've been at this, and it's a real banging head against the wall type of a thing, because people are determined not to pay attention to this and to react to this, and we're just going to have to keep going until we get this to get this message to in front of enough people that we can actually get public opinion to say enough is enough. You know, this has got to stop. This is something that has been going on since prehistory, and in those prehistoric times there was no such thing as equal rights for men and women. There are now today, and this is another part, a gross violation of that principle that men and women should have equal treatment. This is why we're here, and we will keep doing this until it stops.
So could I just get a little bit about who you are and why you're here today?
Mark Shyman of Luton and Bedfordshire Green Party. I've been a parliamentary candidate 3 times in Luton South and once in Welling and Hatfield. I'm here to support the cause against male genital mutilation, and to believe that there should be an equal crime involved in the genital mutilation of somebody, because it's not something that is only committed to women. And plainly, by raising the cause of male genital mutilation, then that raises the female side of it as well, which also is a terrible crime committed. And so we are standing here shoulder to shoulder with the women who are suffering and trying to say that the children aren't given a voice. They're not given a choice. You know, I mean, I have a friend who married a Jewess, and at the age of 21 he had to make the decision to be circumcised. He did that. He was able at that age to make that choice. A child is not given that choice, and that should always be something that should be respected in the child, and that they should, at a time that is appropriate to them, when they have an understanding of what it means, be able to make that decision. If it's what they want, then that's fine, but if it's forced upon them, then it clearly isn't.
So you think it causes a lot of damage,
Yes.
Circumcision when practiced upon male baby infants?
It isn't always done in the most cleanliness of situations. There's no anaesthetic given or anything to dull the pain. It's just a child screaming, and a child's scream can go away. But quite plainly, there can be problems with it, and we are here to highlight that it is generally done in the quietest of backstreet suburbs. There's nothing saying what goes on here. If this was an abortion clinic, people would want to have the right to know. But because this is a crime against males, it isn't often reported.
My name's Tony Stott. I'm part of Healing Men. I'm also part of Justice for Men and Boys, a political party campaigning for the rights of men and boys. I'm here today because one of the greatest offences against men and boys is male circumcision, which is illegal. It's a violence against the person, and yet the government, the Crown Prosecution Service, the police do nothing about it. This is the imposition of parents' rights, R-I-T-E-S, their process, their beliefs, their systems, and imposing those in a violent and an offensive way on children who have no choice, who scream and kick and shout against the offence against their body, but have no choice. I'm fine with people want to believe certain religious or religious beliefs, but I want to make my choice when I'm in a position to do it as an adult. I don't want it done to me as a child. That's what my parents gave me the choice and I thank them for giving me the choice. There are others here today who didn't have that choice, and I'm campaigning for children to have the choice, to have their rights against and not the parents' rights of their religion or beliefs. That's why I'm here. There are some really angry people who have been circumcised. And it's a very difficult thing that if you have been circumcised as a very tiny baby, how do you know what it's like not to be circumcised?
Yeah.
I haven't been circumcised, so in a way I can compare to some extent. And I'm thinking, this is dreadful. This is a dreadful thing to happen. And my understanding is there's virtually the cases where this is a medical necessity is just minuscule. This is a cultural issue, it's a belief system, and it's an imposition on innocence.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard 1 in 16,000 boys who are circumcised, or just boys in general, need to have a medical circumcision, whereas 1 in 10,000 boys who have the operation die from it. So
well, yes,
that's
yes,
fairly harrowing.
Boys dying. You know.
Yeah.
But one of my reasons to be here as well is who cares? You know, who cares that boys die? Who actually? Why isn't that on the TV? Why isn't it on the radio? Why isn't it in the newspapers? Who cares? I care. That's why I'm here.
Yeah, and being a survivor of MGM myself, I am an interested party, so I'm declaring my interest. And I think it's typical that it's one of these men's issues that is not taken seriously, as a lot of men's sexual health isn't taken seriously and is seen as a joke. And so visibility is what's needed to change that.
Right, so you sort of feel that, I mean, just the practice itself needs to end.
Well, I think the practice is completely barbaric and people don't know what the practice is, and I've been speaking to people more and more since I've been on these demos, and when I actually tell people the facts, the scientific facts, they're horrified because they don't know.
Yeah.
And a woman of colour walked past and said to me, I'm African, Caribbean, Irish mix. She said to me, oh, it stops HIV. And I thought, well, if that was the case, then nobody in the USA would have HIV. And it's the highest in the Western world. Hello, it hasn't worked there.
Yeah, I'm fairly certain that it doesn't stop any sexually transmitted disease.
Exactly. And there was a thing on Radio 4 a couple of weeks ago, and there were 2 men and a woman, and I can't remember how it came up, but the man mentioned that some of the boys at the school had their foreskin amputated and some hadn't. And the woman laughed. And then a few sentences later, she laughed again about it. And I thought, if that had been 2 women talking about FGM and a man had laughed, the letters they get twice, the letters they would get, and these are supposedly intellectual, educated people who are on the radio speaking. So that was really irritating. And double standards.
Well, one of the statistics I've heard is that so 1 in 10,000 of circumcisions, 1 in 10,000 boys dies from it, and yet it's only beneficial for 1 in 16,000 boys. So that's the number of circumcisions you need to do, and yet the actual mortality rate from it is way higher. And also, and then you're also not just looking at the number of boys who die from it, but the number of boys who actually have lifelong suffering as a result of it as well.
Which I would put myself in that category.
Yeah.
And certainly at school there were only 2 of us, this was in the 70s by now, in the 5th year so that would be year, whatever that would be, year 10, I don't know, who were mutilated, and that was very distressing. I don't know how it was for Douglas, because boys don't talk. But actually, it was very distressing for me, feeling this weird kind of less than, and the shame, lots of shame, which is very similar to other sexual assaults, because I do put it in that category. And if you did a tiny injury. This was Glenn Callender was saying on Fox News that if you did a pinprick injury on a baby girl, you could get 14 years in prison.
Yeah.
Whereas you can amputate the foreskin and nobody bats an eyelid.
Right,
The double standards are outrageous.
Yeah.
As they often are with men and boys' bodies aren't seen to be sacred. We're disposable.
Yeah.
You can do things to men and boys and that's fine and nobody cares.
With circumcision, like specifically, I've sort of heard some absolute horror stories of some of the worst ones and stuff. And
Yeah, including that famous one where they amputated it and then brought him up as a girl. And
right,
then
yeah.
there's a guy in America I think it was Oprah, who she comes into this whole thing, but and he was saying even from 4 he knew that he was a boy. And the doctor said, "Oh, just give him gender reassignment, it'll be fine." And of course, it wasn't.
Wow.
He ended up killing himself.
Yeah. Yes, it's sad. Yeah.
And the whole kind of restoration thing is lengthy and arduous and problematic.
Right.
And that's irritating as well. That I'm, attempted that and am attempting it, but it's, it's not easy.
No. Yeah.
And you think somebody did this to me deliberately.
Yeah.
So irritating. I was adopted, transracially adopted, and my parents got me when I was 3, so they didn't know the backstory of why it had been done to me. But apparently one of the Norm members was telling me that in the 50s they did that to orphan boys because we were considered that we were dirty tykes who wouldn't look after ourselves, so they did routine foreskin amputation.
That was their rationale for doing it?
Yeah, because they're in care, obviously they're no good.
So they're in care, so circumcise them?
Yeah, because they'll obviously be wayward boys who won't wash themselves. And the other thing that I find really horrible about the MGM thing that I was saying to a friend of mine, and even if you're not in a sexual relationship, as I'm not at the moment, I haven't been for years, but even on your own, it still has damaged your own sexuality with yourself because of mechanics and lack of sensation and all that. So even if you're not doing it with anyone else, it's still, they've messed it all up.
Yeah.
Which is really, really the grief and the rage. I'm sort of coming to terms with it because I've been on this journey quite a while now. But there are moments of despair.
Yeah.
And I think it also damages the relationships, or can do, with intact men. And there's a kind of why did they escape? Why did I get done?
Yeah, I mean that's a common theme as well I see with a lot of men's rights issues. Is I suppose generally for men, there's sort of this societal image of you as if everything's going well for you, then that's fantastic. But otherwise, you're kind of thrown on, the human trash pile.
Yeah.
And that seems to be the fate of I guess a lot of guys who I know suffer from child abuse or with circumcision as well.
Well, it is sexual assault. It's permanent sexual assault. The fact you can't tattoo somebody, but you can amputate part of them. I just believe that babies shouldn't have things cut off them.
It's a fairly
exactly whether they're male,
quite a fair thing to say. Yeah,
don't carve them up,
But thank you for doing this interview. Cheers.
You're welcome.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Well, I'm David, and I'm here today because as a child my parents must have decided that I should have had the chop, and of course for most of my life that didn't really seem to make any difference to me. You've got what you've got and you haven't got what you haven't got, and what you haven't got you don't know about, or I didn't know about. And then about 8 years ago, I suppose, my working colleague's husband, we were engaged in conversation over a Sunday evening meal, and we got talking about circumcision, and he said that he'd been done fairly recently, within 5 years before that, and so my ears pricked up. and he said, well, sex has never been the same since, to which my ears pricked up even more. And I'm thinking, well, what on earth does that mean? So he then went on to describe in quite a lot of detail what the difference was for him in having sex without a foreskin and with a foreskin. And it was at that point that I began to realise that I've missed out on a great deal of pleasure, which I hadn't missed out on before. So I began to feel that without my knowledge at the time, I'd also been victimised as a child by something which I don't know whether it was included in the Bible, but there was probably some deep biblical reference about the circumcised and the uncircumcised. I've still got to go away and research that, but yeah, so I'm here because I think it's exactly right that children should grow up as intended. If the survival of the fittest says that everybody's born with a foreskin, I guess that's why we've all survived so long, and to chop that off for no good reason seems to me to be absolutely ridiculous and completely unnecessary. And an argument we've just had with a guy in a car saying that babies under the age of, if babies are done within the first 6 weeks, they don't feel anything. Well, why is it then that babies scream their heads off when they're born, for goodness sake? Or why is it that the nurse slaps their bottom to make them draw their first breath, for goodness sake? Babies don't feel. Ha ha ha.
Yeah, so I heard in the Peter Lloyd book, Stand By Your Manhood, that there are around 20 benefits, evolutionary benefits to having a foreskin that you don't have if you don't have a...
Well, I'm absolutely relieved to hear that I will have all of those benefits, but I'm afraid all I'm interested in are the things that I've lost. And if evolution was just so good as we believe it is, then how come we're still born with foreskins?
No, that's what it was saying. It was evolutionary benefits to having a foreskin rather than not having one.
I misunderstood you,
and so you think it causes a lot of harm for young infant boys?
I'm sure it's completely unnecessary. If at a much later date then it does become necessary, well, that's fair enough. If it's medically necessary, would I have a problem with that? I think the answer is no.
My name's Richard. I'm from an organisation called Men Do Complain. We started Men Do Complain about 6 years ago, because one of the things we discovered when we were campaigning about circumcision was that people would say, oh, but nobody ever complains. Well, they do now, and we're here at the Thornhill Clinic in Luton, because the Thornhill Clinic is one of the country's clinics, and I hate to use the word clinic really in this case, one of the country's clinics that circumcises the most boys in a year. It's right up there, it's Premier League. And of course this is an operation that's inflicted on children without their choice, and this happens to boys in this country quite widely, and it also still happens to girls in this country quite widely, and it also still happens to intersex children in this country quite widely. And if I'm about anything at all, it's about the universal human rights of all children, and that's the right to grow up free without having their Article 3 rights breached, and that's Article 3 is the article that prohibits degrading treatment, and there's no doubt about it that this is degrading treatment. Their genitals are degraded, whether it's a boy, a girl or an intersex child. If you cut something off without an absolute medical necessity, an immediate medical necessity, then, well, you're breaching that person's Article 3 rights. And it's arguably an assault in this country. The Offences Against the Person Act actually states that a cut through the full thickness of the skin is a wounding, and if you have no immediate medical necessity, no immediate medical imperative, and the person doesn't consent, then that's exactly what it is. It's a wounding, and that's actual bodily harm. The other thing that's trotted out on a regular basis is people come up to you and say, oh, but it's religion. Well, yes, okay, it is religion, and Article 9 of the Human Rights Act, that protects your right to your religion, and it's a qualified right. You can't use your Article 9 rights to trump somebody else's Article 3 rights, your Article 9 rights are qualified. They apply to you, and you can't apply them to anybody else, even if that person is your child. So that's why we're here today, is to try and bring a stop to these assaults, woundings on children, and to protect their human rights. And it's the human rights of all children.
And so you sort of feel with, because there's a lot of focus on banning female genital mutilation and sort of nothing said upon, male genital mutilation, circumcision more generally. And so there's just a disparity there in,
I think there is, without doubt, a complete disparity there, and I think that it's actually one of the things that props up both practices, because there's a cultural view that we must be sensitive to culture that has disastrous consequences for children. It doesn't matter whether it's a boy or a girl, it does have disastrous consequences. And the whole point of that is that when you look at equal opportunities for people to grow up free under, with their Article 3 rights protected, there's no question that it should be applied to one sex or the other. It should be applied to all human beings. It's the Human Rights Act, not this specific group of human beings or that specific group of human beings. And it gives a justification to some of the practices that go on, because the communities that practice FGM, for example, they almost always cut their boys as well, and communities that cut their boys almost always cut their girls as well. Even the Jewish community used to cut its girls in Ethiopia, okay, but there's a problem with the cutting of children's genitals universally. It's a practice that should stop.
Hi, my name's Ian, I'm from Cambridge, I'm a retired solicitor. I'm here because this is a very important issue for men's rights activists to campaign against circumcision, because circumcision was made illegal for women in 1985, and technically it should be illegal for men because it's child abuse, it's chopping up babies' genitals without their consent, and it's not. People turn a blind eye to it, the police won't prosecute. It's crazy that it's unfair that this happens, and there's no medical justification for circumcision in the 21st century. The only people doing it now are doing it for religious reasons, and it's not a compulsory part of any religion, it's an optional part. But nevertheless, where religious practices conflict with English laws should succeed. And cutting a baby's genitals must be child abuse, because if you simply touch a child's genitals without their consent, not that they can give consent at 8 days old, but simply touching a baby or a child's genitals, you can end up in prison for a long time for sexual abuse. So going near a baby's genitals with a knife, whatever you're doing, is just incredible that this is legal, or at least tolerated. And the CPS won't prosecute for this. It just beggars belief. And that's without the fact that I was circumcised when I was a baby, so I have no concept of what life would be like with a foreskin. And I know I have problems with sex. I know it's very difficult for me to have orgasms, and I assume this is because I was circumcised, and that makes sex very difficult. So it's not surprising that STD rates are lower, because the reduction in pleasure of being circumcised means you're going to have less sex. This is inevitable, or you're going to have problems in relationships because the sex takes too long and the woman gets fed up with it. For all these reasons, circumcision should be something that is only done to consenting adults if, after receiving informed consent, full medical advice and opinion, it's overwhelmingly in the best interest to do it. But only consenting adults should do this. Shouldn't be done to children against their consent. Anything you do to a child without consent has to be overwhelmingly in the child's best interest, and the medical evidence is mixed on this. And the fact is, you can't force somebody into a particular religion either through infant baptism or chopping bits off them. It doesn't make them a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew by chopping bits off them. This is done for the parents' pleasure, not for the child's benefit. If people want to become a Christian or a Muslim, they have to understand the religion, they have to investigate the religion, and then as an adult they can choose which religion they want to practice or no religion. It can't be forced on someone. You can't make somebody a Christian or a Muslim just because you as the parent want them to be, and certainly not by chopping bits off. And in any case, It's been
that seems to be why, as a practice throughout history, I guess why it was done a lot of the time was to force someone into that particular ideology, as a physical marker.
Yes.
And
it was. I mean, because in those days they had no real way of knowing people's beliefs, and so the simple thing was to do something visible to mark them. But this was banned. I mean, Hitler in the 1930s marked Jews with stamps calling Juden, so that it was obvious they were Jews. So the fact they'd been circumcised was no use. Are you going to ask every man in the street to drop their trousers so we can see whether they're a Jew or not?
Right. Yeah.
Maybe in the Middle East, when it's 30 degrees all the time, people are walking around without boxer shorts on. You can actually see quite easily. I mean, originally, when people testified, they called it testified because they used to hold their testicles when they swore a statement or an affidavit.
Right.
And in those days, women weren't allowed to, as witnesses, they weren't believed to be truthworthy or trustful, which is presumably why women weren't circumcised, because they couldn't hold their testicles when they were swearing. So the phrase became testified, but we don't hold our testicles now when we swear in court, thankfully.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, these are barbaric, medieval practices. They have no place in the 21st century, and if it's not good enough for girls to be circumcised, it shouldn't be good enough for boys.
I heard before one of the other chaps mention that basically if you allow circumcision, then that increases the rate of female genital mutilation as well, because cultures kind of feel that if one practice is okay, then that normalises the other one. So it was saying it basically increases the rate of female genital mutilation as well.
Well, I don't see the men and women have any should be treated differently, and the reason that you're raising that is to try and create more shock horror at the idea of girls being mutilated, because whatever's done to girls is considered by society to be more important than what's done to boys. I don't believe that. I believe whatever you do to boys and girls, men and women, is equally valid and equally important. And the issue is more about protecting boys and girls equally, rather than saying, well, it's okay to do it for one and not the other.
I suppose I was just sort of kind of contemplating the idea that their strategy, if they want to reduce female genital mutilation, then, surely by going for more of an altruistic, actually focusing on all genital mutilation, that would be a more successful strategy than just focusing on the one. It
depends on the they that you're referring to. But in a feminist society like we live in this country, what they have to do is create an atmosphere which suggests that whatever happens to women is far more serious and dangerous and significant than whatever happens to men. But if you read Judge Mumby's judgment from last year's case, where he compared the different types of female genital mutilation with those of male genital mutilation, he categorized them into at least something like 3 categories. And he said that some of the MGM was worse than some of the FGM, and it's believed that all FGM is bad, and therefore at least some of the FGM is worse, and therefore should also be banned as well. And he couldn't understand why there was this difference. But we know in society, in this country, which is a feminist society, it's controlled and run for the benefit of women. Women's views, women's issues are far more significant than anything that happens to men. So it's not surprising there's completely different levels at which things are judged as to be important or not. So whenever I raise issues of men's rights, people laugh at me. Until as a man it happens to them, they do not believe it's a real issue, because the media is full of anti-female things, and if they look around the world, they find things which perceive to be bad for women. But in this country, it's men who suffer. There are no institutional discrimination issues against women in this country. There are at least 20 direct discrimination issues and 20 indirect discrimination issues against men in this country. Circumcision is one of many direct gender discrimination issues, and it's legal in this country. That is, in the sense that nobody's prosecuted for doing it. If we have a law which makes it illegal, it's not enforced, and any law that's not enforced doesn't exist. And therefore, as far as the government, the police, the CPS are concerned, they are accepting that it's illegal to chop boys, but not to chop girls' beards. And it just beggars belief at the hypocrisy, I'm afraid. And I'd like to see equal treatment. I'd like to see men having the same rights as women. I don't want everyone circumcised. I want nobody circumcised, not through force, not as a child, only if there's overwhelming medical necessity to do so.